For the first time, we have Barrow-wights, Tom Bombadil, and an Ent wife on screen. But Amazon gave these parts very little time in The Rings of Power Season 2, Episode 4, and instead gave more time to maybe cheesy parts or parts that people wouldn't have looked forward to as much. Unfortunately, also, the Barrow-wights probably aren't going to show up in another episode of The Rings of Power. At least it doesn't seem that way. So why doesn't Amazon give more time to these things? Who knows? That's probably a big fault for Amazon, is not being able to put more time, or just for some reason not wanting to put more time towards these unique parts that people would find really cool, and instead focus more on parts that wouldn't be as interesting. We'll discuss these scenes along with the lore differences and vision differences between Amazon and Tolkien, especially regarding Tom Bombadil. Alright, let's dive right in. Welcome, my lords, to the White City, where you will learn more about Middle-earth and discover differences and similarities between the Rings of Power show and Tolkien's books, and whether Amazon's show, episode by episode, is worth watching. I'm Philip Dutt, your host, and I'll be joined by Matt Vandervoort and Mark Schaefer. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the White City Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Mark, and we're going to be talking about the Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 4. So we'll be talking about just each storyline that's in this episode, along with the lore, accuracies, and some worldview comparisons too with the books and Tolkien's vision. Yeah, so like with that, we got 3 different storylines here. We've got the Harfoot, we have the Elves, and we have the storyline with Arondir, Theo, and the Isildur. Those are 3 guys. So start off with the Elves, and with basically we got Elrond and Galadriel who are going to Region to see Celebrimbor, and I guess basically they have the sneaky suspicion that Sauron might be there. Mark, do you remember how they remember or think that Sauron might be there?
So I don't remember specifically. They find a lot of the stuff happens to them, and they run across the bridge first. That's burnt out. Again, we see the evil serendipity. Oh, did a lightning bolt magically happen? Is Sauron somehow manipulating everything in the back of the mind? But then they choose to go south, despite Galadriel's vision through the ring, and then they run into the Barrow Downs and run across the Barrow-wights, and there they find out that the messengers of sent to warn Celebrimbor are dead, right? And we have this very short scene with the Barrow-wights and the Barrow Downs, and they move on from there after some guy dies, and they run into the orcs with Adar, who are coming up to attack Eregion. And then Galadriel stays behind, gives Elrond her ring, and then leaves town. So what were your thoughts on this sort of storyline, Phil? And do you see any differences between the way this sort of storyline is portrayed and the lore of Tolkien?
Yeah, so the one thing I was trying to figure out precisely is when they come to the Barrow Downs, where that was located in the lore, because I know when the hobbits come across it with, I guess Aragorn was with them in the books. And anyways, when they come across the Barrow Downs, I'm pretty sure that they're not very far from Tom Bombadil, to my recollection.
Yeah.
And that's up north, kind of in between the Shire and would be Rivendell up there. So it seemed like they were in a different location than it would have been placed in the books, but
So it's definitely like a map geographical inaccuracy. It's also a timeline inaccuracy because the Barrow-wights are from the Witch King, and you remember the Witch King stabs Frodo with a Morgul blade that turns him into a wraith. Well,
right.
they're wraiths that have been turned by the Witch King from whenever he lived up north. And so obviously there are no Witch King or any of the nine yet because they have not been given their rings yet. And we might even have seen characters in the show, but these are a little early on. So while there's like this timeline and geographical inaccuracy, was there anything about their like portrayal specifically that you were like, oh, I think this is different?
Well, I think one thing is that they've so at least for the show, they've flopped like Galadriel being the commander essentially, and a bit to like Elrond being the commander. And well, what's interesting too is that it almost seems like that would be more lore accurate. That Elrond would be the one leading like an army or soldiers than Galadriel, especially if you're getting towards like you know the end of like the second age or like the third age. But that's another thing. Just as I remember, like I guess Galadriel is still called Commander by the High King by Gil-galad in the show, but I guess like other than that, like you've got the ring. This is interesting. Is that they run into the orcs, right? And so they kind of have to fight off the orcs and get away. And then Galadriel gives her ring to Elrond, which is something, in my opinion, is like I'm thinking, like, really? Come on now, like because another thing with thinking about it is just being more lore accurate. Like, wouldn't the ring make her more powerful in a real sense? And that, like, I don't know, it just didn't make any sense to me why she had to stay behind. I guess, but I mean, she's holding them off. Like, all right, like, sure, they're on foot, so it's not like they're riding horses. It's just, yeah, just the handing off of the ring. Well, I mean, I get it. Like, she doesn't want the ring to be taken by the enemy. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's interesting, like, storyline, at least writing the story that way. But
Yeah, I think we're seeing like a lot of the themes that we've touched on before coming back up again. I was gonna say the Barrow-wights that I really actually thought their portrayal was pretty good. Like that, like, oh, they're like creepy and like in the books they're like terrifying, right? I wasn't really as bothered by the geographical and his like timeline inaccuracy. I will say that like this episode in general, and we'll touch on this in the other storylines as well, it just had like a lot of one-off references to like characters in the lore, right? We'll get to these later, but like there was Tom Bombadil, and then there was like the Ents showing up randomly, and it's like the Barrow-wights, right? It was like these like, but all of them were really brief, and like they could have spent a lot of time with the Barrow-wights and like drawn out the scene a lot more. Instead, it was like this like cameo appearance rather than like any sort of meaningful interaction. And then you're right, we go on to the Adar and the orcs, and that scene also was very strange to me, where like, and this is the big problem I've found with the show is like it doesn't have enough magic in it. So what the rings do is they enhance the person's natural abilities, right? Like elves have this natural magic power that will help preserve their realms, and that's what the ring does. But because they haven't really portrayed this in the show, right? What they're doing is they're having like, the ring do magic tricks, right? It just randomly heals this guy, and you're like, oh wow, if only they had rings later on to help them out, like to help heal people. Like Elrond has a ring when Frodo gets injured in the Fellowship of the Ring, right? Why doesn't he just magically heal him, right? Like if these magic rings, I don't know, right? It's just like all these lore inaccuracies are just like popping up because of this one simple scene of like a guy getting healed from arrow injury. But yeah, it's like this idea that like there isn't enough magic in the show, and therefore they're like running into problems of like the ring is going to be like the Nenya, the ring of water, is going to be just like this magic trinket. That scene was also very interesting in many ways, I think, and I was going to touch on like the interaction between Elrond and Galadriel. I think that actually is working right now, and in the lore, like Galadriel actually leads an army to Dol Guldur with Elrond at the end of the Third Age, while the rest of them are fighting at like the Pelennor Fields. So Galadriel does lead armies. She does go out to battle and stuff. Obviously, again, we've said this before, but she's not really the martial artist kind of fighty person that you see in the show. She's more of a magical high lady. Yeah, and so that is like a little lore inaccurate. But I guess I wasn't like too like, oh yeah, she's like going off to like save the rest of them. I also don't understand why they all couldn't have run together. That was not super clear to me either. I felt like repeatedly in the show they've tried to evoke moments from the original Lord of the Rings. And
Yes.
obviously there was like a
Yeah.
scene, right, where like Aragorn steps out to let Frodo escape and he goes up against all these Uruk-hai. It's like this super epic scene. And I feel like they were like, oh, we're just gonna do that scene with like Galadriel and like we're gonna do switch up a couple things. We're like arrows and we're gonna make it at night. But it's just the same scene, right? Like it's nothing.
That's yeah.
And that's like repeatedly they've done that, right? They've tried to evoke other scenes from like the Lord of the Rings and like sort of have them come over. And I'm just like, I think it'd be fun if you made your own shows and movies rather than just like trying to like recreate nostalgia, right? And it wasn't as epic as Aragorn's moment. So,
No, it wasn't.
um,
That's true. But it is
but
the
yeah.
same thing for me. That is exactly what I thought about whenever that scene came up with Galadriel. Yeah, with Aragorn, yeah.
But what does this say about like their difference between Tolkien's lore and this, like the worldview of the people who are making this show? This difference that we've seen in like the magic and also their desire to like recreate the past. I don't know if you have any thoughts on
Yeah.
that.
Hmm. Well, I think that it's necessarily like to start off necessarily a worldview thing, but yeah, they're obviously like trying to piggyback off of like the other movies to kind of somehow like get the same feeling in
Hmm.
these ones, and then they're losing any kind of, I think what you're talking about too, any kind of like just coming up with a new idea. They're losing like the that sense of
Originality.
yeah, originality. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So because of that, again, it's necessarily like worldview related, but I think going off of that, they then tend to write something for their own purposes as opposed to writing something that's just gonna like go with the lore, for instance. You know what I mean? Like, hey, like I mean, people say, well, they don't really have much to go off of. They're kind of restricted by the Tolkien estate and all this stuff. And I mean, well, like, some of that stuff may be true. I think though still like they could probably be following the timeline better and you know going through things like that. So again, I guess that's not necessarily worldview. Comparing with like Tolkien, like for instance, like Tolkien's worldview compared to Amazon's. But I mean, I think in some ways, like Amazon has stuck to the lore, but they're also trying to make things very much appealing to people today, and you can kind of see that too, like more so. And it's not so much in the show itself, but like the way they're advertising the show to people. Like if you saw like different advertisements they had, like I saw one on like Instagram. There was also just like a video of them talking at the Comic Con, and it was kind of very much the way they were talking and trying to like get people hooked was very much like a just kind of a pitch for like what would get people kind of excited or like interested in any kind of movie today, like something like steamy romance kind of a thing between Galadriel and Halbrand. And it's like in the show, there's like nothing actually, except for like one scene in the first season. So it's just like, I don't know, just some interesting things like that, I guess.
Yeah. I was gonna say that there's this really like weird mix where it feels like they have these moments where they try to evoke the original Lord of the Rings movies. So there's this has been constant, right? Whenever I said in the first season, like whenever Halbrand goes in to save Galadriel, it's like the Frodo going in to save Sam after Sam falls in the water after he tries to chase him at Amon Hen. But like this moment we had in this like episode was the moment Galadriel is like trying to evoke that moment when Aragorn stays behind to help Frodo escape. But there are also a bunch of these like really common tropes in modern day TV that they're also bringing in, and we saw a bunch of those in the other plot lines that we'll get to. But like the quick, like steamy, like oh, I like checking you out between like the two hobbits or whatever. That was like so generic. I felt like I was watching some sort of like rom com or something on like some generic TV show. Or like the oh, I'm gonna stick in a stick to save the person in quicksand. It's like that's like not Tolkien, and I don't know, like yeah, what I found about like so refreshing about the Lord of the Rings movies, not to mention like the Lord of the Rings books are exactly this way, but it's like refreshingly original. Like it's these epic ideas, but they're not like cheap plotline tricks, right? And I think this episode really struggled for me because it was like a lot of these like quick cuts or quick scenes, and that like we just moved on really quickly from one thing to another, like one trope or like reference to another. And that I thought was like maybe what Rings of Power is at its worst, where it's just like cheap nostalgia bait rather than like I feel like in the previous episodes we actually I was like, wow, these are like really cool. We get to see Anatar and other cool moments. But should we move on to one of the other plot lines?
Yeah, let's talk next about the Harfoots.
Ah, got it.
Let's
So
do that.
the
Yeah.
Harfoots, the stranger runs into Tom Bombadil, and there's some scenes there that we'll talk about, I'm sure. And I have a lot of thoughts on Tom Bombadil, his first live action appearance. And then Nori and the other Hobbit whose name escapes me,
Poppy.
Poppy. Nori and
Yeah.
Poppy run into like a Hobbit from this like region of the world who are living in holes under the ground, and then there's like some lore implications of them meeting these hobbits, and apparently Nori's tribe started off to like go find a place where they could all live safely. And yeah, it seems like they might be setting up as like the hobbits finding the Shire in the end is going to be like the last thing, and leading all the hobbits there from all over. Yeah, your
Yeah,
thoughts on this
that's
one, Phil?
yeah, there's one thing they were talking about because they so Sadok Burrows was their leader back with the Harfoots,
Yeah,
and they were just talking about how there was another guy, Burrows, who was with these people, and I guess he had traveled up north trying to find another place for them to live, but these halflings were still in the desert when he got up there. So I guess they were like they knew that like there was a lusher ground for them to live on, but they hadn't found it yet. And it's also interesting too is like they make them very primitive, and you think of just the hobbits, they're very and Hobbiton are very, like Englishmen like they like their
rural English
yeah,
countryside. Yeah,
right. They like their teas and their dainty, things and their pipes and that kind of thing. So they're very like proper. But of course, like I get like maybe they needed to get to that point, but still it's still a gap from where they're
so
at
we'll
now.
talk really quick about the lore behind the hobbits. Is that there were different hobbit groups, and therefore that's like accurate to the lore that like different of them settled in different regions, and there were different subcultures within these regions. If you think about Smeagol, he is from a different hobbit group than the Shire was, and the Shire eventually becomes the nexus of all the hobbits, and so like all of them sort of mash into one group. So there is like I think a cool sort of lore aspect that like yeah, it's not weird to run into hobbits in a different part of Middle Earth at this time. I think my problems with this scene or this like the Hobbit storyline, well, one continues to be that it's like kind of boring, and two that it's like oh we have to explain everything and make everything about the original series be something meaningful and impactful. So like it's like, hey, the discovery of the Shire is going to be this big deal, and it's going to be like this big thing, and it's going to be like the whole show is pointing to here, and like, wow, isn't this like so cool that they discovered the Shire? And it's like that's not that cool to me. Like I could have lived a long time but never read a book about how they discovered the Shire, right? Like, and I think that that's like, oh, we don't need to explain everything of the old show, and that's not valuable or cool to explain something of the old show. Yeah, and this kind of touches on the other part of the storyline, which is like the wizard going to see Tom Bombadil, but it seems very clear that they're setting up the wizard's name to be Gandalf. Like in the time whenever she's talking to the stranger, she's like, "Oh, he's like a great wizard or something," and like they're clearly like seem to be like throwing out words for his name that are closer and closer to Gandalf, and like it's gonna be this big reveal that like his name is Gandalf, and it's like I don't care. I could have lived a long time without knowing how Gandalf got his name, right? Like that's not what makes a show valuable. Is showing like explaining every little detail of the old of something else. But yeah,
Hmm.
so that's my issue with this storyline. And other issue is Tom Bombadil. So my issue with Tom Bombadil is not nearly jolly enough, and his boots are not yellow. And I cannot stress how much his boots needed to be yellow. But no, I think in all seriousness, like Tom Bombadil, like he is like this such a strange character. Like go back and read the Fellowship of the Ring. Like you're like he does not belong in this story, and like he is so strange and different. And I did not get that vibe at all in this episode. Like it was like, oh, here's a wizard who's like sort of like chilling in the middle of thing. And yeah, and again, it's like Middle Earth is like a place full of magic. So Tom Bombadil isn't strange because he's magical. He's strange because he's strange, right? Like he's just so out there, and he's like singing all the time. I don't know. It was a very big like letdown in terms of like this does not feel like the Tom Bombadil I read in my book at all.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Phil?
It's interesting how I think it might have been in our review of the official trailer that we talked about how Tom Bombadil didn't really. I mean, yeah, so doesn't really nothing's really affected by him. There's not really any like role that he plays in the story. He's just there that the hobbits pass by. This guy.
And he helps the hobbits, but he doesn't like give them big wise
Right.
words or anything. Like he plays very little role in like the rest of their journey.
Right.
And it seems like in this episode, in this show, he'll play a very big role in Gandalf's journey.
Yeah, with that, it seemed a little bit odd for him to be talking about how he was like there at the beginning of like almost like the creation of everything, almost as though they're like taking away from like a Luvatar as being like in the beginning, more or less. But that was just kind of like my sense of it. And yeah, so for him to be given like what I guess what really did get me is that they're treating him like a wizard. And
Yeah.
I'm like, but he's not a wizard. Like he's not a star, he's not a wizard. I mean, does he know magic and is he very magical? Like yes, but yeah, like
So
that's about it. I don't know.
yeah. So as like a lore check, the lines they had Tom Bombadil say, actually pretty much every single line they had Tom Bombadil say was a direct quote from the Fellowship of the Ring. So he does say he's the oldest and he was there before anything else. So the theory behind Tom Bombadil, if you're like going for an in-world theory, some people say it's like Tolkien inserting himself into the story. But the in-world theory is that Tom Bombadil is actually a Maiar. So he actually is sort of similar to a wizard in that respect. But he was the first person to come to Middle Earth. So Iluvatar created Middle Earth, and like Tom Bombadil was like there, right? And so before anything else, before like the Valar shaped the world, Tom Bombadil was already in the world, and he never left. So that idea that he calls himself the eldest is like lore accurate. That like he probably was there.
Okay.
It is a little bit of like a weird flex because if this character, because the character is an Istar, they're like also as old, like because they were all created by Iluvatar. So it's like while Tom Bombadil might have got there faster, it's not like this is like this big deal of like Tom Bombadil is like, wow, he's so old, right? Like it was a big deal to the hobbits because they're like 100 years old. Gandalf, if the stranger is Gandalf, would be obviously just as old as Tom Bombadil.
Okay. Interesting.
My issue with it was more like the qualitative aspect of like it doesn't feel like I'm seeing Tom Bombadil from the books.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, they did. I mean, they tried to put in some like songs that he was kind of mumbling and whatnot. I thought it was interesting too.
But okay, the songs and like the jolliness were like at a 1. They need to like dial it up to 11, right? Like he's just such a strange character. He doesn't like belong in this story. Like you're not like, oh, this kind of guy is like kind of like a weird thing. You're like, wow, this guy is like kind of probably nuts. I don't know, right? Like that's how he feels in the Lord of the Rings. He feels like he's crazy, except
Mm,
he's not. And I think there's like this really deep part of like Lord of the Rings where like everybody around him is like oh, everything's gonna end, and Tom Riddle like just doesn't care, right? Like he's like the ultimate like doesn't give a crap. I think there's actually something like deep about that. That like one, it says something about his like power that he's not worried, and like in the show, right at the end, he's like, "Oh, we're not alone. Like the Dark Wizard is showing up." Like Tom Bombadil would not care if like Sauron knocked on his door, right? Like he just wouldn't care. And like, yeah, that was like
uh,
just in general was I thought a little bit they should have done a better job with him.
well, the other thing too that got me was thinking about location again, and I'm like, the only time he shows up is out by where the hobbits ran into
The
the
Shire, so
right.
not in
Yeah.
the right location at all. Though the idea, I guess, that Tom Bombadil moved around a lot is like not that strange to me. I also like I would have liked to see like Goldberry because like when Tom Bombadil like so to explain like Tom Bombadil a little bit more actually is I think it's helpful to like go through the patterns of the Lord of the Rings, but like Lord of the Rings, like Frodo and Sam and the hobbits will like go through an adventure that will like cause like a crisis, but then there's like always a house of resting afterwards. And as they go along, like the crises get worse and the houses of rest get like not as good each time. So like eventually like they first go to Tom Bombadil's house, which is like the idyllic house, right? And the next house is like Rivendell, and Rivendell's like really nice, right? And then as they go along, they keep having these like patterns of like even with like, oh, in the movies they don't really portray this as well, but like being with Faramir is like a house of rest because they're like with men who are like the good side, right? And they're able to be safe there. And the movies they portray as like they're like in danger, but it's like a place of rest for them in the books. And then they go on, and there's actually this small moment they have in Mordor, right, of like being safe for a time, and they have like this time to regroup. Anyways, but to portray this as like Tom Bombadil is like Tolkien's portrayal of like what his ideal like way of life is, right? Like even it's like this really deep thing of like this joy that's just overfusive throughout your life, and this guy who's just constantly singing. I think it's not a mistake that Tom Bombadil was married, right? That he had a wife who he loved and was a big part of his life, and he lived in nature. So I think rather than being like this like lonely little hermit, it was like actually Tolkien's idea of like what a perfect or ideal life is like, an ideal home is like. Sorry to like go on that rant, but I think
No,
that's important.
that's cool to like point out the kind of the stages of the resting places on their journey. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. So
Yeah, but like it's also like Tolkien trying to say something about like, oh, this is the ideal place of rest, and also like what the greatest challenges are throughout the Lord of the Rings. Yeah, to the hobbits. So
yeah, I guess the last thing with just Tom Bombadil is that like I just find it like kind of odd to think about him like showing magic to 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 the wizard. Anyways, well, see how it goes.
all right, next plot line is Isildur and Arondir, and the lady's name I can't remember.
I can't remember her name either. And then Theo.
Theo. So really quick,
Yeah.
Arondir finds out that the girl is pled allegiance to Adar. They put her in chains. They take her out. They get stuck in the mud. The big worm monster comes out, and she saves them. And so they're like, "Oh, she's good now." And then they're like, "Is she good now?" Because she draws a silver sword on him. And then the Ents show up and they take out her. And then they have this conversation with Arondir. And then now we know that the orcs are there, and they say like let Theo go. And now the orcs are there, so that will probably they'll try to like go and attack the orcs or something. So thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah. I thought the worm is kind of like a neat addition. I I guess like I think there are like types of worms that were in the lore originally. I don't know if that would be a definite type, but I mean, he seems to fit. I don't know that the mud was deep enough for him to to live in all the mud like that. But one thing I did find, maybe you picked it up better than I did, but whenever I was watching it, I'm like, wait a second. How'd the Ents know that Theo was connected to Arondir? All of a sudden he's like coming out of the tree and Arondir's like Theo, and it's like, I don't think there was any communication about this, but
Well, yeah.
maybe I
It
missed
seems
it.
like it seems like they let everybody go, right? Because that's where like the girl's fiance shows up or whatever, and now it's gonna be like this
Okay.
weird love triangle. So my thought on this storyline was like this is where like everything got like super cheesy. Like this is all just a bunch of like either quick references or like cheesy cliche stuff. They're like thing in like mud, like quicksand or whatever. Like that's so generic of like, oh, the person we don't trust like sticks in a stick, right? Oh, we all thought she was gonna leave, now she sticks in a stick and like pulls us out. The worm, like it was so random. Like, I don't know, right? This just giant worm underneath, and it's like, oh, okay, like I guess this is a thing now. Yeah, I guess I felt like it was like so random that I didn't know if I had any thoughts. It's like not lore inaccurate, but like at the same time, you're like randomly just throwing it in the middle of nowhere is sort of weird. Especially because like they could have spent more time with the Ents, right? Like that was the other thing is like they threw in the Ents, but that scene was so quick, and like that was probably the highlight of the episode for me is like the Ents. But like the Ents are like the people who talk really slow, and that dialogue was like so back and forth and so fast paced that I was like, this doesn't feel like we're talking with Ents. I don't know, right? It was like, oh, we're just gonna throw in this reference because we can, and yeah, and the like the love thing with like between Isildur and the girl, like I just am not feeling it. Like this is just some soap opera drama thing where like, oh no, now her like lover is back, and do I trust her? Like, I promise I won't let anybody hurt you or whatever. I don't know. Like, very
Yeah,
dumb, very boring to me. Yeah.
because it's I don't know. They're kind of taking like this girl with a sketchy past and trying to like connect her with a sealed door, which I don't know. I mean, I guess it's not necessarily a bad thing or anything, but it's just an interesting way of trying to tell the story and twist up the storyline.
They're trying to add like a little spice to it, but like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think you want to like. I think you should aim to like for more epic than like cheesy stuff like plot lines, right? Like you think of like Arwen and maybe that's like a high bar, but like Arwen and Aragorn or something, or even like Eowyn's flirting with Aragorn is like totally different than this, right? And is just cheesy and it's quick and it's like, oh, all of a sudden like people are falling in love. I will say that like Arondir like continues to be like the standout actor of like, oh, I get the vibe of like these are what elves are supposed to feel like in that moment between like him and the like Ents is like, oh wow, this is what it's like supposed to feel like, right? Like he feels like this mysterious old person who has this connection to nature, and like the nature is like responding back. I don't know, like he just is continue like a standout performance to me, and just like wanted to shout out him.
Dude, I so that was the next thing I was gonna touch on too. Is yeah, it's just like the whole like him, speaking to the ends or like, kind of talking to them through magic. Yeah, it's like it just seems like he's like the best elf in the show. And
Yeah.
he's not even lore. He's not
Yeah,
even
right.
lore. He's
And
like,
he's not like, oh,
what?
I was like born in Valley Nor or something. He's just like some random dude, right? And like he's the one that acts
Yeah.
like the most elf like, right? And then even like
He's got like a
power,
shaved head almost.
right? They did like power is not about like just fighting ability, is like right his ability to like, oh, I'm gonna like lay down my bow and connect with the trees is like, wow, this is what it means to be powerful, right? That like to not always be able to like cut through your way through every single like obstacle, but to be able to like reason or connect with people or to have like power over things, right? Yeah, I don't know.
It seems like he might be like the one guy who like has read the Silmarillion like 5 times and the Lord of the Rings books like 20, and he's like, guys, I got this. All right, just let me do my
Yeah.
thing. It's
I feel
like,
like actually, I'm guessing that he studied the Lord of the Rings and the way the elves acted and were portrayed in that, and like maybe especially Legolas a lot more than maybe other people did, or other people just wanted to sort of set their own tones for the way the elves should act. But yeah, like again, like everybody else acts like they're like a man or like a human with like pointy ears, and he acts like he's like a mysterious immortal person, elf person. Yeah, like that's again, yeah. But again, I wish we did more time with the Ents, right? Like, why not slow that scene down, make the Ents like talk super slow, and like spend more time. And some, I thought there were actually some like to talk about like the difference in the lore and the worldviews. I actually think there was like some pretty deep things of like the Ents hold on to things for a really long time because they're so old and they age so slowly. She's like, forgiveness takes an age. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Tolkien would like write that the end saying that necessarily, but at least like you're trying to say something deeper about like because whenever healing takes a long time, it can forgiveness can also take a long time. Yeah,
that's something that I mean, a deep, slow voice doesn't have to be an ent, I guess. But that's what you just think of Treebeard in the trilogy, and that's what comes to my mind. And like Treebeard's the only one who talks in the Two Towers, at least. So, I mean,
yeah,
but
good
there
point.
are there are other ents who talk in the books, like the
Quick
what's
beam.
Quick Beam? That's right. Yes, yes. The one elf that I mean the one ent that actually like
He
kind
spends
of
actually most of the time with like Merry and Pippin in the books, right? Like he takes them around most places. Yeah, it's interesting. So one thing I will say is like the one Ent was clearly an Ent wife, so clearly that's why she has a higher voice. And yeah, I thought their like portrayal was pretty good, except again the talking slow thing. But you're right, like Treebeard is like was a really good portrayal in the Two Towers, and they didn't have like a lot of other Ents talking, so maybe this is like a little more difficult than we thought.
yeah. But I totally do agree that the ent scene was pretty short. I would have liked that to be longer. And like cut down on some of the other stuff too. I think
Like the
like
random worm showing up.
random worms showing up, like I don't think the Harfoots needed all that time probably. You know,
I
like
don't
they've
think the show has needed the Harfoots. I'm gonna be real with you, Phil.
yeah. Yeah. They I don't know, man. They could have been done a little better probably. It's it's just hard to say. It's hard to say cuz the stranger is also just another like he just needs to know like who's bad and who's good. Like none of this figuring it out. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Like he should be the one who's like figured all this out already, you know, by now, and it's like, all right, we've got to go like help
Face
A
Sauron or
Lendil in
whatever, right?
Numenor or something. You know what I mean? Or like, let's go find Sealdor or like something like that. To me, would be like that would be good. That would be huge. I mean, I get it. Like, it's gonna be maybe cool to like see the wizards. You know, that's maybe a cool idea to have them go up against each other. I get it, and maybe they'll try to bank on that one. And you think about like the Dark Wizard, like he honestly like seems pretty legit, and just like in what we've seen of him, just as far as a wizard's concerned. And I guess like the Blue Wizards did roam around, and eventually like they just like lost it.
Explicitly, the Blue Rose Wizards wandered around in the East. So if this character is supposed to be a Blue Wizard, that could be them. Though why they're not calling him a Blue Wizard and calling him the Dark Wizard, who knows?
Right. Because like people also have like theories that they like became like dark wizards like later on eventually.
Yeah. So Tolkien actually Tolkien had changed his mind on the Blue Wizards frequently, but the first theory he had was that they became evil and set up cults for themselves, and then his next theory was that actually they like opposed Sauron in the east, like the Gandalf opposed him in the west, and therefore like they actually were critical to stopping Sauron and were like good guys. And I like if the show is trying to portray that the stranger is actually a blue wizard, then it could be that like they're playing both of those. That one of the blue wizards is the dark wizard who is evil, and one of the blue wizards is like going to be the stranger who's good, and therefore they're going to like fight in the what east. But it seems pretty clear that the stranger, is going to be Gandalf, and the dark wizard is probably going to be like a random blue wizard or something. They're just going to throw a name. I need more like general thoughts on this episode, Phil. Did you say what your favorite part was, or least favorite part of the episode was?
Well, I think I mean after talking about it, it wasn't so bad, but I was bugged by like how did they know that Theo was connected with Arondir and whatnot, but I guess they let everybody out at the same time, so that kind of dispelled that doubt. And there's some things that seemed off with Tom Bombadil as we were talking about, and his like what was that one? So the one part where he was like talking to what was the who he was calling that the stranger was like, oh, are we alone or is there somebody else here?
Yeah, that was really strange. So they like seem to have a woman singing in the other room, like Goldberry sings with Tom Bombadil in the books, and then the stranger's like, "Who is singing?" And he's like, "Nobody, just me," or whatever. And so it seemed like maybe they were trying to give a nod to the people who read the books of like, "Hey, see, we know Goldberry exists, and we're going to reference her, but we're not actually going to include her in the show." Was sort of how I interpreted that.
Interesting, or at least they weren't showing her then.
It seems like they're probably not going to show her since the stranger's like, "I'm all alone and there's nobody else here," or whatever, unless he like randomly shows up later on.
Okay, yeah.
Unless Goldberry is like one of the Dark Wizards people. Oh my goodness, how crazy would that be? She's the one, like the white lady or whatever.
Yeah, that would be weird, man. That would be weird.
I was gonna say my favorite moment was the Ents. My least favorite moment was probably generally the Tom Bombadil because it was really disappointing. Though honestly, like the ring healing magically was probably a close second. I just am so fed up with the show's portrayal of magic, and I rant about it every single episode. But it's a problem every single episode. So, but yeah, I think in terms of worldview, I was thinking about like what is their view of the idyllic, like if I see Tom Bombadil as like the idyllic life that Tolkien is portraying as like he has a wife and he's deeply connected with nature and he's like so happy and he's singing all the time and he has like interesting fashion choices, but like this idea of like if that's like Tolkien's picture of idealism, then is their view of what Tom Bombadil is different in the show, trying to say something about what it means to have the idyllic life, that it is being like all alone as opposed to being like with somebody like a wife or like a connection to nature. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. No, I think what you're saying there is good. I don't know exactly if it's easy to say that their opinion of idyllic life is like what they're trying to get across in the show is like with the way that they're portraying Tom Bombadil. But if it definitely seems that that's Tolkien's like way of portraying like what life might be at its best, then it'd be easy to just assume that that's the way they're doing it as well. But yeah, I've been also like just over the past few episodes kind of impressed at times, to be honest. I came into like all the episodes, but like the beginning, episode 1, with very much oh, this is not, this is going to be the level of season 1. I'm leaving my expectations at that. So they definitely have in different ways been better than season 1, and the lore also has been, I think, in different places has been, I think, drawn better than what they did in season 1. And while like not, it's not perfect and by any means, but I don't know, it's just it's a little bit easier to just have fun, in my opinion. Like it was a little easier just to have fun with this season. I think a lot of people still came into the show with very criticalness. I
Yeah,
mean, give it give it to all the serious fans who are, you know, giving it a hard time over lore and everything, which is fine. But yeah, it's just kind of like some ending thoughts and all that.
yeah, I actually would totally agree that I really enjoyed this season much better than the last one. Part of me wonders if it was my expectations were lower. Though I was gonna say like the first 3 episodes I thought were much better. This last episode, I was just like, they're just throwing in references. There are a lot of cliches. I thought what the first 3 episodes did was like, oh, you focused on like the unique storylines of the original season, and that was like I thought more interesting. But now it seems like they're just trying to throw in references to like other stuff rather than focusing on what they've got. Yeah, I think that's all we have for tonight, Phil.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark. That was a good talk and good reviewing it with you. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll catch you guys for our review of episode 5. Thanks for visiting the White City. Before you leave, please subscribe to our podcast and check us out at thewhitecitypodcast.com. We're on YouTube or Facebook under the tag @the White City Podcast.